Hello and welcome back to At Your Pace Online's Michigan Real Estate Education Series. We'll open this class by examining the history of condominium and the legal foundation for condominiums. Then we'll go into the aspects of a condominium, including the creation of a condominium and the role of the condominium association. We'll also talk about cooperatives and homeowners associations. We'll finish this class by discussing the Michigan Condominium Act. People often use the term condominium interchangeably with the word apartment, with the only distinction between the two being ownership. In this context, an apartment is a unit that's rented, whereas a condominium is a unit that's owned. However, this definition is a little too simple for our purposes. The difference between a condominium and an apartment complex is purely legal. There's no way to know a condominium from an apartment simply by looking at the building. What defines a condominium is the form of ownership. A condominium is a form of property ownership where a specific section of larger piece of real estate, usually a building, is individually owned. On the other hand, when a structure is developed as an apartment building, the developers retain ownership of the building and the individual units. The units are then rented to different tenants. Ownership of the space contained within a condominium unit, often called airspace, is assigned to an individual. The use of and access to common facilities in the larger piece of real estate are controlled by the association of owners that jointly represent ownership of the whole piece. Common facilities might include hallways, heating systems, elevators, and exterior areas. Fees are charged to the condo owners for maintenance of the common facilities. It's also possible for a condominium to consist of single-family dwellings. With detached condominiums, owners don't maintain the exteriors of the dwellings like the yards. Site condominiums provide the owner with more control and possible ownership, as in a whole lot or lot line condominium, over the exterior appearance. These types of legal structures are preferred by some planned neighborhoods and gated communities. Now let's look at the definition of another concept common in real estate: housing tenure. Housing tenure refers to the financial arrangements governing an individual's right to occupy a dwelling unit. Do they rent it or do they own it? If they own it, do they own the property outright, or is the property financed through a lender, through a mortgage, for example? There are several types of housing tenure. Owner occupancies, where a person or group who occupies a house owns the building and usually the land it sits on. Tenancies, where a landlord who owns an apartment or building rents out the right to occupy the unit to a tenant. Cooperative, where ownership of the entire building or complex is held in common by a homeowners association. Individuals have the right to occupy a particular unit by mutual agreement, but don't hold exclusive ownership of it. Public housing. This refers to government-owned housing, whether provided for free or leased at a subsidized rate. Squatting, which refers to occupation by a non-owner without permission from the owner. And land trusts. These are often used as alternatives to ownership for privacy and legal reasons. Property is owned by a trust which grants occupancy rights to the members of the trust. So why are we talking about this? Because the condominium concept created a new way of thinking about property ownership. Previously, property ownership had been limited to ownership of land. With the introduction of the concept of condominium, it became possible for an individual to own airspace. Specifically, an individual purchases ownership of the space described by the boundary of a set of walls. The walls themselves may or may not be included in the individual's ownership, depending upon the terms of the condominium agreement. This is the first half of the condominium concept. The owner of a unit also owns an undivided interest with other unit owners in the common elements, and that interest cannot be separated from the unit. That's a good basis to start with. Now we'll move forward into an exploration of the history of condominiums.